Welcome back, everyone, to GGN. It's Wednesday, October 23rd, 2013. All right, I have a article I'm going to read for you. It's from Benjamin Fullford, a subscriber and that supporter emailed me this, and I was interested in it. There's some things that I've heard from coming from Fullford that are very interesting. Doesn't mean that I believe in all of them or that you should, but I think that some of what he says you should take into consideration, just basically based off a lot of the articles that I've come across in the last, let's see, at least a couple of weeks. I'd say last week. I haven't been able to really cover the Middle East, Syria, and all that stuff. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but without further ado, I'm going to go ahead into this article, and then I'm going to show the articles that I found along with Fullford. Like a junkie selling fairly heirlooms, the U.S. corporate government buys time. So we're talking about the government shutdown in China. Remember China asking and telling the U.S., you better handle this? The U.S. corporate government and the mafia families that own it managed to stave off default on October 17th. So this by acting like junkies selling family heirlooms to a pawn shop in order to buy a few more days' worth of drugs. In one example, they sold a whole bunch of state-of-the-art helicopters, including Blackhawks and Apaches, to China for an undisclosed sum, according to the Pentagon sources. This is one article. A U.S. Apache attack helicopter appears in China. Did they clone it from October 14th? The same fascist family sold a bunch of cruise missiles and cluster bombs to the totalitarian Gulf monarchies. Pentagon to sell bunker busters, cruise missiles to Gulf monarchies, and this is October 19th, October 18th, an $11 billion deal. Rothschild's branch of these families, for its part, worked out a deal where the Chinese will build French nuclear reactors of dubious safety and reliability in the UK, according to M5 sources and news reports. The Chinese will also be paid double the going rate for energy produced by these reactors. According to MI5, this is a good sign the cabal got money from China, now in exchange for a promise to pay them back by squeezing British energy users later. And yeah, here it is. That's all I can get for you. I don't have access to the Financial Times. UK wants Chinese nuclear to help move to a low-carbon economy. Probably has nothing to do with that, but China gets access to Siberian oil fields. I found this from October 21st. Look at the date. On October 18th, state-owned Russian oil firm Rosneft signed a memorandum of understanding with a state-owned China Natural Petroleum Corporation, a significant arrangement that gives China its first direct access to East Siberia's rich hydrocarbon fields for joint development. October 22nd, China heads to South American global energy scramble. China's global hunt for crucial energy supplies is taking it into America's backyard, with two Chinese state firms winning production rights to the multi-billion-barrel deepwater oil field off Brazil. Then you have, at the same time in Japan, the government's slaves who run this country on behalf of the Western mafia families are in a state of panic, according to the imperial family sources. One thing that spooked them is the over 100 lawsuits going on claiming that the current Abe government stole the last general election. The result is that the Freemasons in Japan, headed by a gentleman from India, have asked for peace negotiations with the Japanese patriotic groups struggling to liberate this country. Several female agents were sent to visit the White Dragon Society in the past week, using the word Illuminati in the very first sentence they spoke, and claiming to either represent the Vatican, the current Japanese slave government, or the government of China. He said that they received a phone call from a high-level Japanese government saying that Dragon family released funds, basically, and a big example or visible sign of this would be the announcement of the Russian government that would be offering health services or healthcare services free of charge to all citizens. So far, they haven't made an announcement, and he says here that they make a lot of claims like that, like they're going to do it. So far, no money's appeared. And it says that they've lied so many times that you can't really believe them, only their actions. At best, though, these approaches show the cabal regime in Japan is getting increasingly nervous. The near bankruptcy of the U.S. government last week left them deeply spooked, says Japanese sources. They have a growing understanding that the U.S. government that was selling state-of-the-art weapons to China and otherwise showing signs of surrender was not going to protect Japan in a war against China. The U.S. dollar tanks. From Reuters, the dollar slid to a two-year low against the euro, and a measure of global equity markets rose for a fifth session in a row on Tuesday after, they say, weak U.S. jobs data reinforced expectations that the Fed will keep its easy money policy attack into 2014, the sixth stage of collapse. It says a solution for avoiding the sixth stage must be found, from Club Orlov, but I don't know what that solution would look like. I do find it unsafe to blithely assume that collapse will simply take care of the problem for us. Some people may find this subject matter so depressing that it makes them want to lie down in a comfortable position on something warm and soft and die. October 23rd, the IMF warns Japan about using monetary policy as a crutch. Since Japanese Prime Minister Abe took office last December, both the yen and yields on sovereign debt have gone down, largely due to the government and the Bank of Japan's heavily involvement in the economy's monetary framework. But they're now purchasing Japanese bonds at a faster pace than Japanese government can issue debt. October 22nd, China warns Japan over reported plan to shoot down drones. They warned Japan on Tuesday against playing up tensions after Tokyo reportedly approved a plan to intercept and shoot down any foreign drones if they ignore warnings to leave Japanese airspace. So Fullford says there's plenty of signs that in the West of a general surrender to China on the part of the cabal-controlled governments there. In addition to letting the Chinese build a French nuclear power plant, and the Rothschilds have opened up the City of London to Chinese banking interests in a big way. Chinese banks will be allowed to set up branches in the UK, and direct trading between the renminbi and the pound sterling will be allowed. Chinese offshore banking will also begin, according to Rothschild sources and news reports. October 15th, London to become Chinese offshore banking center. Britain has relaxed stringent rules for Chinese banks willing to set up in London. Beijing, in turn, opened up its markets to British-based investors, making the latest move to establish the yuan as one of the world's key currencies. On the U.S. side of the banking oligarchy, there's also growing indications that something extremely unusual is happening at Rockefeller-controlled J.P. Chase Bank. The bank just sold its headquarters building, one built by David Rockefeller as headquarters for Chase Manhattan Bank, to the Chinese. The bank also has the world's largest gold vault in the basement. Same time period, October 18th, China's largest conglomerate buys building housing J.P. Morgan's gold vault. J.P. Morgan Chase to limit cash withdrawals, prohibit all outgoing international bank wires, bank officials say, from October 17th. Then this is from October 21st, J.P. Morgan buying its way out of legal troubles. Since the announcement of the agreement had been reached between the Department of Justice and J.P. Morgan Chase was surprising only in the size of the penalty. The country's largest bank and the second largest in the world agreed to pay $13 billion. It's the largest penalty on record that any company has paid to settle claims made by the Justice Department. J.P. Morgan also recently sold all of its holdings in short-term U.S. Treasury certificates. There's an article there, and I think on Bloomberg as well there's an article. Finally, we also have the announcement that J.P. Morgan Chase is limiting cash withdrawals, which we just covered. So his analysis of all this is the best guess for what lies behind all of this is that the U.S. branch of the Fed sold the largest bank in the U.S. to the Chinese interests in order to keep their empire teetering on for a few more months. The limits on withdrawals may be meant to ensure the Chinese do not get empty shell when they move in to claim their prize. The other big source of emergency funding for the Feds appear to be Iran. The sudden warming of the relationship between the G7 countries and Iran is leading to the unfreezing of $50 billion in Iranian money, according to the Mossad-linked website Depka. No doubt this money is helping the Feds continue their scam a bit longer. October 18th, Obama's potential release of $12 billion of frozen Iranian assets would be followed by $35 billion from Europe. About warming up to Iran, I noticed this. This is when I first found the article I wanted to cover. It was, on the 16th. No deal yet, but significant progress in Iran talks. I noticed that they were backing off Iran all of a sudden. After Syria, negotiators praised Iran's offer as an important contribution in two-day talks with the P5+1 in Geneva. Next ones are scheduled for November 7th to the 8th. Unlike past meetings without agreement, says that these talks appear to have yielded substantial progress. The EU is quick to praise Iran's offer, saying that they were an important contribution, and even officials conceded that they never had such intense, detailed conversations with Iran on the nation's civilian nuclear program. Basically, they're like, just show me the money, right? Iran and Britain agree to appoint charged affairs in 2 weeks. Iran and Britain have agreed to appoint the charged affairs to each other's countries in 2 weeks to pursue a path to restoring bilateral relations from October 16th. It's all this, kind of like with Syria, their chemical weapons, Russia kind of brokering it. Russia proposes lifting Iran's sanctions in exchange for international control of nuclear program. It says Moscow has influence on the talks between the six world powers known as P5+1. So interesting, because he says that Putin's actually more in charge now. These changes can be seen as a good indication the Zionists no longer control political trends in the Middle East, but rather Vladimir Putin does. The last Zionist holdouts in the region appear to be in the government of Saudi Arabia and the Nazi Netanyahu regime in Israel. They are still causing murder and mayhem and need to be stopped ASAP. Remember this, on October 18th, Saudi Arabia rejects UN Security Council seat over failure to deal with conflicts. They're an advocate of foreign military intervention against Syria's government. They rejected the rotating seat on the UN Security Council, saying the body cannot deal with international conflicts. October 22nd, Saudi Arabia warns of shift away from the U.S. over Syria and Iran because they didn't get what they want. They signal anger over U.S. policy in the Middle East. Said it could affect arms and oil trade. Most of the arms are going one way, and that's to them, and they just bought a bunch. So as far as the oil going one way to us, well, the U.S. actually just passed, I believe, Saudi Arabia and or Russia is a top oil and natural gas producer. So remember this? This was back in August. August 8th, people said, oh, this wasn't true. This is just disinformation. Maybe it was. Maybe it was true. Russia rebuffed Saudi offer to drop Syria support for arms. Remember when Saudi Arabia supposedly was asking Russia, please stop backing Syrian government to let us take down Syria and Assad and the Shiites. They wanted Saudi Arabia to change its stance on Syria in return for a huge arms deal. And you know all those gruesome reports that are coming out with those numbers of hundreds, 80 killed, 300 injured in Iraq all the time. Saudi Arabia behind violence rise in Iraq. So I said Assad, they lost when they gave up their chemical weapons because they admitted to guilt, but who knows? Maybe it was a good thing. Maybe it weakened Israel's ability to attack Iran and move on to Iran. Israel, the biggest loser in chemical weapons deal. And they're losing, too, as far as Syria goes. I mean, the actual moderate rebels are actually starting to side with the government and doing patrols and securing places with the government. And they're turning against the al-Qaeda terrorists. In Syria, 100 gunmen surrendered to the army. More Israeli-made weapons have been seized. From today, October 23rd, U.S. halts aid to Syrian rebels. U.S. has cut off northern Syria moderate rebel groups from non-lethal aid. The Obama regime continues to disengage itself from Syria. It says there's been a fundamental shift in the geopolitical priorities in the Western countries in the Middle East. The governments of Turkey, Qatar, and Jordan have also stopped supporting anti-Assad rebels in Syria, as have the Kabbalists in the U.S., Britain, and France. All these changes and announcements above came between September 30th, when the feds missed the international payment deadline, and October 17th, the day that they had to find money or be publicly declared bankrupt. He says, who knows what the Kabbalists are going to do when the next payments deadlines come up on February 7th. There's the article, Syrian rebel factions and deals with local army commanders both under al-Qaeda assault. Then you have this, President Assad more confident than ever, says analysts. In previous talks of regime change is what some of the rebels want. On part of the international community has been pushed to the side, and now Assad is a partner for the international community. Talking about Saudi Arabia snubbing the UN Council seat, you got the Pope snubbing Israel now. Pope Francis will not meet Netanyahu. Diplomatic embarrassment has arisen following the refusal of Pope Francis to meet Israel's prime minister at short notice. Netanyahu's office had already announced that a meeting would take place during his visit to Italy. But the Pope had no plans to this regard. I heard that he actually stood up Obama when he went over there, and that they actually had a bunch of Marines get sick when they went over to eat there in their chow hall. Not very good host, I guess. Turkey could annul secret cooperation agreement with Israel's Mossad from 10/22. Turkish intelligence chief to recommend reneging on deal that allows Israeli agents to act freely on its soil. Another blow was Egypt, right? October 15th, Israel bluntly told the U.S. not to cut aid to Egypt, which they did. Backing off on Iran, October 14th, the Iranians are mixed on nuclear capabilities. 1/3 approve of nuclear program for military use. 56% approve of using nuclear power capabilities for non-military use. October 23rd, Iran will pursue nuclear program within non-proliferation treaty framework, says their MP. So Iran is going to build nuclear power plants in the Persian Gulf Coast. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran announced Wednesday that they're going to construct new nuclear plants along the Gulf Coast. regards to the February 7th deadline, perhaps they could sell D.C., including Washington, all of its politicians and other whores to the Chinese to use their base for the North American operations, sort of like what the British did with the Hong Kong after the Opium Wars. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.